All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Absolutely. Always ready to dig into the latest tech happenings.
Well, it may be December, holiday season in full swing,
Yeah.
but the tech world doesn't really take a break, especially not when it comes to these FA&E
Right.
stocks.
Always something brewing.
We've got a whole stack of reports here just from that short Thanksgiving week, and let me tell you,
Oh, yeah.
it's juicy. We're talking potential antitrust lawsuits, new tariffs on the horizon,
Hmm?
even a rumor about Zuckerberg meeting with Trump.
Oh, wow.
So buckle up. This is going to be a wild ride.
Yeah, sounds like it. What I find interesting is how everything seems to be happening at once. It's
Mhm.
not just the usual market ups and downs, it's regulation, it's global politics, and then the tech itself is changing so fast.
It's like trying to hit a moving target, isn't it?
Exactly.
Okay, so let's start unpacking all this, shall we? First up, Meta. This whole Zuckerberg-Trump meeting at Mar-a-Lago has everyone talking. What do you make of the timing, especially with Meta's FTC trial coming up next April?
The timing is definitely interesting. You've got the FTC trying to break up Meta's ad business. Then you've got potentially a new Trump administration, maybe appointing some really strong antitrust people.
Right.
So yeah, it could be that Zuckerberg's trying to, smooth things over before they get even tougher.
It's a power play, isn't it? Like a chess match.
Absolutely.
On one side, they've got these legal challenges in the US, but then on the other side, they're launching this huge subsea cable project connecting Southeast Asia to North America.
Mm.
Seems pretty bold, considering the circumstances.
It is bold,
Yeah.
but it also shows you how ambitious Meta is globally. It could be that they're, strengthening their presence internationally just in case things go sour in the US.
It makes you wonder how those actions, like Australia's social media ban for minors, play into all this. Do you think we'll see more countries doing things like that?
I think it's very possible. The Australian law, it really shows you how worried people are about social media's impact, especially on young people. If other countries follow suit, platforms like Instagram, which is owned by Meta, they could see a big drop in users.
Yeah,
And that, of course, affects their revenue, their growth.
absolutely. Now let's move on to Apple. They're facing their own set of challenges, it seems. One of the big surprises this week was seeing those reports that Apple is actually losing ground in China. Local brands are becoming more popular. What's driving that shift, and what does it mean for Apple in the long run?
The Chinese market has always been super competitive, but what we're seeing now is that the local brands, they're really stepping up their game. It's not just about price anymore.
Right.
They're innovating, they're understanding what Chinese consumers want in a way that Apple, well, maybe hasn't quite figured out yet.
Interesting. And then there's the AI side of things. We saw reports about Apple's AI efforts hitting some roadblocks in China, all because of government regulations. What does that tell us about AI on a global scale?
China's approach to AI regulation is unique, that's for sure. They're really focused on data security, on national control, and that often clashes with how U.S. tech companies work, relying on lots of data.
Right.
So what's happening with Apple, it could be a sign of things to come for other companies as AI develops globally.
It's a whole new set of challenges to navigate. Speaking of challenges, let's talk about those tariffs that Trump has proposed. The potential cost to consumers is enormous, like $78 billion a year. How do you see that affecting a company like Amazon, which relies so much on global supply chains?
If those tariffs actually go into effect, it would have a huge impact on Amazon. We'd probably see higher prices for consumers, disruptions in their supply chain, maybe even changes to where they manufacture their products.
Right.
It's a lot to consider.
It is. But even with all this talk about tariffs and trade wars, Amazon is still going full steam ahead with their new quantum computing program, AWS Quantum Embark. What does that tell us about Amazon's vision for the future, and where does quantum computing fit into all of this?
It shows you that Amazon is thinking long term. They're betting on technologies that could be game changers. Quantum computing, it's still early days, but the potential is huge. Think medicine, materials, science, even AI. It could revolutionize everything.
So you've got these potential economic headwinds with the tariffs, but then you see a glimmer of hope with how well Amazon did on Black Friday. What do you make of that contrast, and what does it say about how people are spending money right now?
I think it's fascinating. The strong Black Friday sales, especially for Amazon, it tells you that people are still willing to spend, especially if they think you're getting a good deal. Even with all the uncertainty about tariffs, about the global economy, people haven't completely stopped shopping. Yeah, it really shows you the power of a good deal.
It does. Speaking of quiet weeks, Netflix didn't make much noise in the news this time around. Should investors be reading into that, or is it just, the calm before the storm?
I think you can look at it a couple of ways. On the one hand, maybe they're doing okay, just focusing on their long-term plans.
Mm.
On the other hand, maybe they're waiting, seeing how all this stuff we've been talking about plays out before they make a move.
It's a waiting game.
Yeah, could be.
All right, well, let's switch gears for a minute and talk about NVIDIA. There's been a lot of buzz about these new export restrictions on something called high bandwidth memory. Can you break that down for us? What is it, and why is it such a big deal for NVIDIA and for their customers?
Sure. High bandwidth memory, it's basically a really fast type of memory that's essential for anything that needs a lot of computing power, like AI, machine learning.
Okay.
It's a key part of NVIDIA's GPUs, those graphics processing units,
Right, right.
which are used in everything from gaming PCs to those huge data centers.
So if these export restrictions limit how much of this memory is available, what kind of impact are we talking about?
Well, the main thing is that NVIDIA might not be able to sell its most advanced chips to certain countries.
Hmm.
There's a big development in that whole U.S.-China tech competition. Yeah. And it's probably going to affect a lot of industries that depend on NVIDIA's technology, especially anything to do with AI.
We're already seeing some of that, right? Some NVIDIA customers are holding off on buying the current H100 GPUs, figuring they'll just wait for the next generation, the Blackwell GPUs coming out next year.
Yeah.
Is that a smart move, or are they missing out by waiting?
It's a tough call. The Blackwell GPUs, they're supposed to be a big step up.
Yeah.
But if everyone waits, someone else could jump ahead with the current technology and get an advantage.
Makes sense. Now let's talk about Google. Trump's idea of appointing an AI czar. That sounds like something straight out of a movie.
It does, doesn't it?
So what would this role actually involve, and how could it affect a company like Google?
Well, the AIs they'd be in charge of all AI policy for the entire U.S. government. Research, development, ethical concerns, national security, the whole thing.
Wow.
And since Google is so big in AI, they'd definitely be a major player in all that.
It's like they'd have a seat at the table, right? But it seems like Google has more immediate problems with all those antitrust lawsuits piling up. What's at stake there, and what could happen as a result of those legal battles?
The big issue is whether Google has too much power, and if they've been using it to crush the competition. The outcome could be anything from fines to changes in how they do business.
Hmm.
In the worst case, maybe even breaking up the company.
Wow, okay. And then there's that whole thing with Epic Games, with Google appealing that ruling about their App Store fees. Why is that case so important, and how could it affect the entire tech industry?
That Epic Games case, it's a big one. It's all about how much control Google has over its Android system and how much they charge developers to sell apps.
Right.
If Epic Games wins, it could change how app stores work everywhere, like pricing, how much money developers make, all that.
That's a domino effect.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, Microsoft, they're usually seen as the quiet giant in all this, but they're facing an FTC investigation too. It might not be as flashy as some of the other news, but what could the consequences be for them?
An FTC investigation is serious business. It could mean big fines for Microsoft.
Okay.
Or force them to change how they operate, especially when it comes to competition and data privacy.
So even the biggest companies aren't immune.
No one is immune.
And OpenAI, which is closely tied to Microsoft, they're dealing with copyright lawsuits. How could those lawsuits affect the way AI companies use data, and what does it mean for AI in general?
Those lawsuits are challenging how AI companies use data to train their models. If they're successful, it could mean a big shift in how AI companies get and use data, maybe stricter copyright rules, more focus on data privacy.
It's a whole new set of rules.
Yeah, potentially.
Feels like every move these companies make, there's some new legal challenge waiting for them.
Yeah, the landscape is definitely changing. As these tech companies get bigger, more powerful, governments are stepping in, worried about competition, data privacy, all the ethical stuff.
It's a balancing act, isn't it?
It is, for sure.
Speaking of changing landscapes, let's talk Tesla. They've had quite a ride with the EV tax credit. Trump wants to get rid of it, but then California might create its own state-level credit. What do you make of all that back and forth, and how could it affect Tesla?
Well, it's definitely complicated. Losing that federal tax credit would hurt Tesla, no doubt about it. But if California steps in, it could help, especially since California is a huge market for electric vehicles. It really shows you how much power states have, even when the federal government is doing something else.
It's a push and pull.
Yeah, exactly.
And of course, we can't talk Tesla without talking about full self-driving FSD. Is that technology really close to getting approved? And what happens if it does?
That's the big question, right? If Tesla gets FSD approved, it would be huge for them and for the whole autonomous vehicle industry. It could give them a real edge, but it also raises a lot of questions. Safety, liability, what it means for people driving.
Yeah, a lot to think about. And then there are those partnerships with Neuralink and XAI. Those AI collaborations, they sound like science fiction come to life. What kind of impact could they have on Tesla, on the world?
Neuralink and XAI, those are some of the most ambitious, most potentially world-changing areas of AI research. Brain-computer interfaces, artificial general intelligence. I mean, that's big stuff. And if they're working with Tesla, it could lead to breakthroughs that change not just cars, but healthcare, communication, everything.
It's mind-blowing, really, when you think about it.
It is.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from regulation and lawsuits to new technology in the economy. What are the main things you hope people listening take away from all this?
The biggest thing is that the tech world is constantly changing. These companies, they're dealing with so many factors, and it's important to stay informed. The choices they make, the technology they develop, the regulations they face, it affects all of us.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, what's one thing you'd like our listeners to really ponder as they go out and explore all this, the F&G stocks, the tech industry in general?
I'd say, think about the role these companies play in your own life, in society. What excites you about the future of tech? What worries you? By asking those questions, we can all help shape a future where technology is used responsibly, for good.
That's a great point. And for those who want to stay ahead of the curve, check out resources like the Semiconductor News Show and that free newsletter we mentioned. Knowledge is power, especially in the tech world, which moves so fast. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.